Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to The Boring Historian, your cozy nook for slow, peaceful journeys into the folds of history. Today, we are stepping behind the veils, beyond the golden halls, into the dark alleys of one of the most secretive places in the Ottoman palace, the harem. But before we begin, if you find comfort in these slow steps through time, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps us continue exploring these quiet histories together. And if curiosity stirs within you as we go, don't hesitate to leave a comment below, perhaps a question, a reflection, or a wish to learn more about the lives we uncover. I read them all carefully and with gratitude. As the candlelight flickers across worn stone and gold-tiled walls, we'll explore the silent corridors that once bustled with servants and viziers, concubines and commanders. From the dark alleys of intrigue and ritual to the sunlit grandeur of marble pavilions, we'll gently uncover the contradictions that defined life within Topkapi Palace, the heart of an empire that ruled for over 6 centuries. So adjust your pillows, dim the lights, and breathe slowly. Let your mind settle. History begins not with the clang of battle or the flourish of trumpets, but with a door creaking quietly open. The harem, shrouded in mystery and often misunderstood, was not only a place of seclusion, but a world of intricate power, deep loyalty, whispered secrets, and complex human stories. Together, we will walk slowly through the shadowed corridors where sultans' lives intertwined with those of their families, trusted servants, and sometimes even political rivals. If you enjoy slow, calm explorations of history, please do consider liking this video. It really helps this channel grow. And if you have thoughts or questions about the Ottoman Palace or its hidden worlds, feel free to leave a comment below. I read every one with care. Now, with the lights dimmed and your mind ready to wander softly, let us step quietly through the dark alleys of the Ottoman harem. In the sprawling Topkapi Palace, nestled within its 4 vast courtyards, lies the harem, a sanctuary enclosed by thick walls and guarded by loyal eunuchs. This was the private world of the Sultan's family and closest confidants, a place forbidden to all but a select few. Unlike popular imagination, the harem was not merely a den of indulgence or mystery, but a complex social institution, built on strict hierarchy, deep traditions, and a delicate balance of power. Home to sometimes over 300 women, the harem was more akin to a royal household, filled with mothers, wives, concubines, servants, teachers, and guardians. Each person played a role in the daily rhythm of palace life, bound by rules older than the empire itself. The harem occupied a series of interconnected chambers, hidden courtyards, and secret staircases. No stranger could wander these halls. The eunuchs, men who had been specially chosen and trained, stood vigilant as both protectors and gatekeepers. Every door was a threshold to a different story. Behind golden lattice windows, behind velvet curtains, life unfolded in whispers and quiet steps. At the very pinnacle of the harem's hierarchy stood the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother. She was the most powerful woman in the palace, wielding influence that could rival any grand vizier or military commander. In many ways, she was the true queen of the palace, holding sway not only over the harem, but often influencing imperial decisions. The Valide Sultan oversaw the education and conduct of the women, managed the harem's household, and maintained strict order within the walls. Her word was law inside those chambers, and her power could affect the fate of princes, concubines, and even ministers. Imagine the dignity and weight of this role. The Valide Sultan was both mother and monarch, blending affection with authority, and often used her wisdom and influence to guide the empire's future from behind closed doors. The women of the harem came from many origins. Some were daughters of noble families, others were gifted or purchased from distant lands, while some were prisoners of war. Regardless of their beginnings, life within the harem demanded adaptation and resilience. Though secluded, the harem was not a quiet refuge from power. It was a center of influence and intrigue. Within these walls, women wielded their own forms of authority, negotiating status through wit, loyalty, and sometimes cunning. The birth of a son to the Sultan could elevate a concubine to great heights, while the Valide Sultan often played a crucial role in palace politics, supporting factions and shaping policy from behind the scenes. Rivalries simmered beneath the surface, alliances shifted with the tides of favor, and even the eunuchs could become players in this delicate game of power. Education was a cornerstone of harem life. Girls and young women were taught not only domestic skills, but also literature, theology, and governance, knowledge necessary for navigating the complexities of palace life. The harem nurtured not just future mothers of sultans, but also women of culture who could compose verses, debate philosophy, and participate in the spiritual life of the empire. It's easy to imagine the harem as a place of unending luxury, but behind the walls lay a spectrum of human emotion, joy and sorrow, friendship and jealousy, hope and despair. The women faced uncertainty. Every day might bring a new challenge or opportunity. Friendships could turn to rivalry. A favored concubine today might be forgotten tomorrow. Yet within these walls, bonds were also forged. Quiet moments of laughter, shared confidences, and mutual support. As you let these images settle softly in your mind, remember that the harem was more than a place. It was a living world, full of history, heart, and human complexity. Here, in these shadowed corridors and sun-dappled gardens, the lives of women intertwined with the fate of an empire. Their stories, often hidden from view, shaped the Ottoman legacy in profound ways. Imagine, if you will, the morning light filtering softly through the intricately carved lattice windows of Topkapi Palace. The air is cool, scented faintly with jasmine and rosewater, carried on a gentle breeze from the distant gardens. In one quiet chamber, a young girl named Anastasia stands, her heart a mixture of fear and wonder. Born far from Istanbul, on a small island, her life had already taken a turn she could never have expected. Sold into slavery, she had traveled across seas and lands until finally arriving in the palace's hidden world, the harem. But this was no ordinary place. Behind these high walls, power breathed in the silence and moved in the shadows. Her new name, Kosum, was whispered softly by the attendants, who dressed her in fine silks and adorned her with delicate pearls. Though still very young, her eyes held a quiet strength, a calmness that would soon become her greatest weapon. Each day, Kosum learned slowly, patiently. She observed the other women, watching their smiles and silences, their alliances and jealousies. The eunuchs who guarded the harem moved silently, their presence both comforting and watchful. Her beauty was noted first, the curve of her cheek, the softness of her skin, but it was her mind that truly set her apart. She listened to stories told in low voices, absorbed lessons in poetry and religion, and learned the delicate art of conversation that masked deeper intentions. Years passed, and Kosum grew into a woman both graceful and formidable. She captured the attention of Sultan Ahmed I, whose eyes found in her a rare calm amid the storm of court life. Her days became filled with whispered counsels and quiet prayers, her nights with the promise of influence and danger intertwined. When she bore the Sultan a son, Murad, her status changed forever. She was no longer simply a favored consort, but the mother of a future ruler. Her thoughts turned to protection, not only of her child's life, but of her own place within the ever-shifting world of palace politics. The harem was a labyrinth of power. Rivalries twisted like the winding corridors. Friends could turn to enemies overnight. Kosum moved carefully, weaving alliances with eunuchs and servants, understanding that her survival depended on the loyalty of those unseen. One evening, in the glow of candlelight, Kosum sat with her closest advisors. The weight of empire pressed on her shoulders, yet her voice remained soft but sure. News had come that the Sultan's health was failing. The empire looked to the young Prince Murad, but many in the court whispered doubts. Would he be strong enough? Would Kosum be strong enough to guide him? Her heart was steady. She whispered prayers into the night, not just for her son's reign, but for the delicate balance she needed to maintain. She was aware of the dangers, the jealous eyes, the plotting hands, the sudden shifts of favor that could sweep away a woman in an instant. Kosum Sultan's story is one of quiet strength, patience, and wisdom. From the frightened girl who crossed oceans to the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire, she embodied resilience. She ruled not with force, but with subtlety, shaping the fate of an empire through whispered advice, careful diplomacy, and an unyielding love for her son. As we drift through the palace's quiet halls, her story reminds us that behind every golden hall lies 1,000 whispered stories waiting to be told. Now imagine the soft light of late afternoon slipping through the carved windows of the palace. The warmth of the sun has softened, and the air is filled with the faint scent of orange blossoms and warm spices carried from the kitchens below. In a quiet corner of the harem, Nurbanu Sultan moves with measured grace, her silken robes whispering softly against the marble floor. She is a woman known for her beauty, a calm, serene presence with eyes that seem to see much more than they reveal. Yet beneath her composed exterior, a subtle tension stirs. There is a new concubine in the Sultan's favor, a younger woman, bright-eyed and full of laughter, who has begun to draw the Sultan's attention away from Nurbanu. The palace corridors buzz with quiet murmurs, the courtiers exchanging glances that hint at shifting tides. Nurbanu feels the weight of this jealousy, not just hers, but that which stirs within the walls like a slow-burning ember threatening to ignite. She does not confront openly. The harem is a place where silence is often louder than words. Instead, she watches, listens, and waits. Each day she attends her duties with calm dignity, her movements precise and thoughtful. When the Sultan's footsteps echo near, she meets his gaze with a soft smile that hides the careful calculations behind it. One evening, the Sultan holds a private gathering, and the young concubine is near him, her laughter bright and unguarded. Nurbanu stands apart, the flickering candlelight casting gentle shadows on her face. Her heart aches not with anger, but with the slow realization that favor is as fleeting as the breeze. She reaches out to the eunuchs, whispering carefully, building alliances in the quiet corners, friendships born not from jealousy, but from a shared understanding of survival. Slowly, the balance shifts. The young concubine's laughter grows softer, the sultan's visits less frequent. Nurbanu's quiet patience bears fruit, not through conflict, but through gentle influence and calm resilience. She tends to the children, nurtures the friendships among the women, and surrounds herself with trusted allies. Her power is subtle, woven like a fine tapestry behind the scenes. But this story is not just one of rivalry. It is also one of deep love and fierce protection. Nurbanu's heart is most bound to her son, Murad III, whose future depends on her quiet strength. She teaches him prayers and poems, guides his steps through the maze of palace life. When shadows lengthen over the empire, it is her hand that steadies his. In the hush of night, when the palace sleeps, Nurbanu allows herself a moment of vulnerability. She looks toward the sky, wondering what fate the stars have written for her and her son. Her story, like the harem itself, is woven from threads of love, loss, power, and survival. It is a tale whispered softly through the golden halls, an echo of strength behind a veil of calm. Now close your eyes and let your mind drift to the heart of the Ottoman palace, where the walls hold secrets and every shadow has a story. Among the figures moving quietly through the harem's labyrinth was Ibrahim Aga, the chief black eunuch, a man whose life was devoted to protecting the palace's most sacred spaces and its secretive inhabitants. Ibrahim was no ordinary guardian. His presence was calm but commanding, a silent force whose loyalty was as deep as the Bosphorus is wide. Born far from Istanbul, in distant lands, Ibrahim had undergone the journey that many eunuchs did, taken from his family, transformed, and trained to serve in the heart of one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. Yet, in this forced exile, he found purpose. His life became intertwined with the women of the harem as protector, confidant, and sometimes the bearer of their deepest secrets. One night, a fire broke out in the palace, a danger that could have destroyed not only walls, but the delicate balance of power within the harem. Ibrahim awoke to the faint scent of smoke curling through the stone corridors. Without hesitation, he moved swiftly, his years of experience guiding his every step. He found frightened women clutching their silks, eunuchs rushing to contain the flames, servants scrambling to gather precious possessions. With a calm authority, Ibrahim organized the evacuation. His voice was low but firm, directing others to carry the children and elderly to safety. He soothed the panic-stricken, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. As the flames were quelled, the gratitude in the eyes of the women he saved was profound. But Ibrahim never sought praise. For him, his duty was not a choice, but a calling. His role extended beyond the physical safety of the harem. He was the silent guardian of its secrets, carrying messages between women, delivering whispered confessions to the Valid Sultan, and navigating the delicate political currents with discretion and care. In quiet moments, Ibrahim would sit by the palace garden, listening to the soft rustle of leaves, reflecting on the invisible threads that tied him to the empire's fate. Though the world outside saw only a eunuch, inside the palace he was a keeper of trust, man whose loyalty shaped history. Deep within the heart of the palace, in a secluded chamber softened by rich fabrics and muted candlelight, a quiet anticipation hung in the air. The palace had long been a place of beauty and grandeur, but tonight it held something even more precious, the fragile promise of new life. The Valid Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, sat beside the bed, her hands folded calmly in her lap, though her heart raced beneath her composed exterior. The young consort, radiant even in the throes of labor, breathed steadily, surrounded by women who had served her faithfully for years. Outside the chamber, the corridors seemed to hold their breath, as if the very stones themselves were waiting for news that would shape the future of the empire. For months, the palace had been filled with rumors and whispered hopes. A new prince would secure the dynasty, a symbol of continuity and strength. But with such hope came tension, whispers of rivalries and fears, for not every woman in the harem wished the same fate. The consort's labor was slow but steady, each breath measured, each moment charged with both pain and promise. Midwives and attendants worked with quiet diligence, their hands steady even as their eyes flickered with concern. The Sultan, though absent from the chamber, sent messages of support, his mind torn between the weight of empire and the fragile life about to enter the world. As hours passed, the chamber was filled with a mixture of incense and anticipation. The air was thick but calm, a stillness broken only by the rhythmic breathing of the mother and the soft murmur of prayers. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a cry pierced the silence, sharp and clear. A boy had been born. The Valide Sultan smiled softly, a tear glistening at the corner of her eye. The women around the bed exchanged quiet looks of relief and joy. The future was secured, but the delicate balance of power had only just begun to shift. In the days that followed, the palace seemed to glow with newfound hope. The infant prince was swaddled in the finest silks, his tiny fingers curling around the fingers of those who cared for him. His cries echoed through the halls, a sound both fragile and powerful. Yet beneath this joy lay a shadow. Other women watched closely, their faces calm, but their minds alive with plans and fears. The birth of a prince was not just a blessing. It was the opening move in a game where survival depended on subtlety and strength. The young mother rested often, her gaze distant as she pondered the uncertain path ahead. Her love for her son was fierce and protective, yet she knew the palace was a place where trust was rare and loyalty fleeting. The Valide Sultan, now more than ever, assumed her role as the boy's protector. She arranged for tutors and guardians, carefully choosing those whose allegiance would shield the child from harm. Days blended into nights, and the harem's hidden world pulsed with quiet energy. Every whisper, every glance carried meaning. The prince's name had not yet been decided, but already he was the center of attention, a beacon of hope in a palace filled with shadows. And so the story of the birth of a prince unfolds, a moment of fragile joy wrapped in layers of tension and quiet power. Within the hidden world of the Ottoman Harem, power was never held openly. It was a delicate dance of whispered words, subtle glances, and carefully crafted alliances. Imagine a quiet afternoon in one of the harem's inner courtyards, where orange trees cast dappled shadows over smooth marble floors. Here, away from the watchful eyes of eunuchs and guards, a small group of women gather beneath a trellis, heavy with fragrant vines. Among them is a favored consort, her eyes bright with ambition but tempered by caution. She leans in close, speaking in hushed tones to a trusted confidant. Their words are soft, almost like a secret song carried on the breeze. Plans to support a particular prince, to strengthen their position in the palace, to protect those they love. This was the lifeblood of the harem's politics. Alliances were forged not with swords or proclamations, but with promises and shared secrets. Trust was rare and precious. Some women formed bonds of sisterhood, others played a careful game of manipulation, each aware that a single misstep could mean exile, or worse. One such alliance was between the Valid Sultan and a younger consort, united by a common interest, the future of the young prince who had recently been born. Together, they navigated the intricate court rituals, ensuring their messages reached the right ears. Through eunuchs and servants, their influence stretched beyond the walls of the palace into the heart of the empire's governance. Yet, as they moved in the shadows, dangers lurked. Rival factions watched closely, ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. Sometimes a whispered accusation would appear, a claim of betrayal, a hint of conspiracy, designed to sow distrust and fracture alliances. In this silent war, words were weapons sharper than any dagger. Despite the peril, these women remained steadfast. Their resolve shaped the fate of the empire, even as history often overlooked their subtle power. Behind the silk curtains and golden halls, it was their quiet strength that held the balance. In the quiet shadows of the Topkapi Palace, behind gilded doors and latticed windows, the Ottoman Harem was not merely a place of luxury, but a complex world of power, survival, and intricate relationships. Among the many women who walked its halls, one figure stood out for her intelligence and influence: Roxolana, also known as Hürrem Sultan. Roxolana's story is one of transformation. Born as Alexandra Lisovska, a Ukrainian girl captured and brought to Istanbul, she rose from slavery to become the legal wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, an unprecedented position for a concubine. The dark alleys of the harem were her realm, but she moved with a purpose that changed the course of Ottoman history. Her intelligence and charm captivated the Sultan, but it was her political acumen that secured her lasting power. Roxolana carefully cultivated alliances within the harem, navigating rivalries with other women, each vying for influence over Suleiman and their children's futures. She managed to shift the traditional power structures, securing legal marriage rights and unprecedented privileges for herself. One particularly tense episode unfolded around Roxolana's rivalry with Mahidevran Sultan, Suleiman's first consort. The competition was fierce, not just for Suleiman's affection, but for the position of their sons as heirs. These rivalries played out quietly in the harem's corridors, whispered conversations, subtle gestures, and carefully staged displays of favor. It was said that Roxolana once arranged for a midnight meeting with the palace's chief eunuch, a powerful figure who controlled access to the Sultan. Through this secret alliance, she ensured her presence remained ever near Suleiman, even as rivals schemed to diminish her influence. Then there is the story of Kösem Sultan, a woman whose life stretched across decades and whose power rivaled the sultans themselves. Originally from Greece, Kösem entered the harem as a concubine of Sultan Ahmed I. She rose to become Valide Sultan, Queen Mother, effectively ruling the empire as regent during the reigns of her sons and grandsons. Her story is woven with tales of political intrigue, ruthless strategy, and careful patience. Kosum navigated assassination plots, palace coups, and shifting alliances with remarkable skill. Her dark alleys were battlegrounds of whispers and shadows, where loyalty was a currency and betrayal a constant threat. One well-documented episode involves Kosum's use of diplomatic correspondence to exert influence beyond the palace walls. She maintained secret contacts with foreign ambassadors, negotiating treaties and alliances that shaped Ottoman policy. These delicate interactions took place under the veil of secrecy demanded by her position, her hand guiding the empire from behind a curtain of silence. As the night deepens, these stories from the dark alleys and golden halls reveal a world far from mere opulence, one of resilience, cunning, and the quiet, relentless pursuit of power. Each tale a thread in the complex tapestry of the Ottoman Harem, inviting you to rest within its slow, enduring rhythm. Within the quiet shadows of the Topkapi Palace, beyond the well-trodden tales of famous sultanas, lies the poignant story of Nesrin Hanım, a consort of Sultan Abdülmecid I, whose life was woven with both hope and heartbreak. Nesrin's journey began far from the grandeur of Istanbul. Born into a Circassian noble family, she entered the palace as a young girl, her world shrinking to the confines of the harem's intricate and secretive quarters. Despite the luxuries surrounding her, Nesrin's life was one marked by the fragile balance of favor and neglect. Her early days in the harem were filled with cautious wonder, learning the customs, etiquette, and subtle arts of palace life. But beneath the delicate silk and perfumed air, the reality of competition was ever present. The Sultan's favor was a precious, fleeting gift, and Nesrin knew each smile could be a stepping stone or a trap. Nesrin's story takes a tender turn with the birth of her son, Shehzade Mehmed Ziaidin. In those moments, her status within the harem blossomed, a mother's love intertwined with the protective instinct to secure her child's future. Yet, the joy was shadowed by the dangers that lurked: political rivalries, jealousy, and the ever-watchful eyes of the palace guards. Despite her elevated position, Nesrin faced deep personal struggles. Historical accounts reveal that she suffered from health issues, possibly exacerbated by the stress and isolation of harem life. Her son's safety became her anchor, yet also her greatest source of anxiety. As months passed, whispers of intrigue circled the palace halls. Nesrin's influence was challenged by other consorts, each maneuvering subtly for the Sultan's attention and their own survival. These tensions simmered quietly, like shadows shifting under moonlight, never openly declared, but palpably felt. In one poignant episode, Nesrin is said to have sought solace in the palace gardens during a rare moment of respite. Underneath a canopy of jasmine and cypress, she confided in a trusted handmaiden, sharing fears about her son's place in a world where even a mother's love could be a dangerous secret. Her story, though marked by sorrow, also illuminates the resilience that defined many women of the harem, an endurance that was as much about spirit as circumstance. Another lesser-known but equally compelling tale is that of Shah Sultan, daughter of Sultan Selim II and Nurbanu Sultan. Unlike many women confined strictly within the harem's walls, Shah's life bridged multiple worlds. She was known for her charitable works, founding schools and mosques, her actions quietly transforming the fabric of society beyond the palace. Yet, her influence was carefully guarded within the harem, where she maintained a delicate balance between devotion to family and the subtle exercise of power. Shah's life was also marked by personal tragedy. She married her cousin, but their relationship was strained by palace politics and external pressures. When her husband was executed in a political purge, Shah faced the emotional aftermath with quiet dignity. Her story reveals the human heart beating beneath the layers of protocol and power, a slow, steady pulse of love and loss, courage and grace that threads through the Ottoman harem's history. These stories, lesser known but deeply human, unfold softly in the quiet spaces between grandeur and secrecy. They invite you to linger, to breathe slowly, and to rest within the gentle shadows of a world where power was entwined with profound vulnerability. Among the many women whose names echo softly through the halls of history, there is Mihrisha Sultan, a figure whose life blended political influence with deep personal sorrow. She was the consort of Sultan Mustafa III and mother to Selim III, a ruler remembered for his efforts to reform the empire. Mihrisha's story is one of resilience in the face of change. Though surrounded by the opulence of the palace, she lived through turbulent times, moments when the empire trembled under internal strife and external pressures. In the dim corridors of the harem, Mihrisha was known for her patronage of the arts and architecture, commissioning fountains and mosques that softened the harsh realities of palace life. Yet behind these public acts lay a private world of anxiety and hope as she sought to secure her son's future in a court filled with rivalry. She was a woman of quiet strength, often retreating to a small, hidden garden where she would spend hours in contemplation, the scent of roses mingling with the soft murmur of water from a nearby fountain. These moments of solitude were her refuge from the ceaseless intrigues that marked her daily existence. One night, as the palace slept under a velvet sky, Mihrisha received troubling news. A faction within the court opposed her son's reformist ideas, seeking to undermine his authority. The weight of this knowledge pressed heavily on her heart, yet she maintained a serene exterior. She gathered her closest confidants, their whispered counsel echoing softly in the shadows. They spoke of strategy and survival, of patience and resilience, the silent tools wielded by women of the harem who shaped history without ever stepping into the sunlit spotlight. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of the palace, the story of Hatice Sultan, sister of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, unfolds with a different kind of softness. Unlike the more famous sultanas, Hatice lived a life marked by personal devotion and quiet influence. Known for her charitable works and compassion, Hatice often visited the poor and sick of Istanbul, her footsteps echoing softly through the narrow streets beyond the palace walls. Her care extended beyond the gilded confines of the harem, touching lives often forgotten. Hatice's correspondence with prominent poets and scholars reveals a mind both gentle and sharp, engaging deeply with the cultural life of her time. Her letters, written in flowing script, speak of longing, wisdom, and a desire for peace amid the palace's turbulence. Her presence was a calming force within the harem's dark alleys, a reminder that even amid power struggles, kindness could weave its quiet thread. As the night deepens, these stories blend like soft shadows, tales of women whose lives were marked by love, loss, strength, and subtle power. The Ottoman harem, often imagined as a place of mere luxury, reveals itself instead as a world of intricate human emotions and slow, enduring influence. The hushed corridors and moonlit courtyards of the Ottoman Harem, where the voices of women echo not in volume, but in the patient resonance of their quiet strength. We move now into another deeply human tale, threaded with longing and the heavy perfume of secrecy, drawn from the veiled annals of the palace. Dilferib Caden, her name, like a sigh on a silk curtain, meant heart ensnarer. She was a lesser-known consort in the court of Sultan Abdulaziz in the 19th century. Not born into prominence, she entered the harem as many did. Through tribute, her background erased the moment she passed the threshold into Topkapa's endless stone embrace. In her early years in the palace, Dilferib lived quietly, observing more than she spoke. She listened, truly listened, to the silence between footsteps, to the shift of moods in the air, to the rustle of fabric that could mean affection or a summons. The women around her played their roles in an invisible ballet of power and grace, but Dilferib preferred shadows. Her rise came not through beauty alone, but because she learned the temperament of the Sultan. Abdulaziz was unpredictable, stormy at times, withdrawn at others. It was said Dilferib could speak with him in silence, that her presence alone calmed him. She began to accompany him on evening walks through the private gardens, both of them saying very little, both understanding the solace of shared stillness. One winter, when snow blanketed the courtyard domes, a crisis came quietly. Another concubine, far more favored in public, spread a rumor, suggesting Dilferib had spoken treason in a dream, interpreted by a court astrologer. In the harem, dreams were not mere phantoms of sleep. They were omens, weapons even. Dilferib was summoned by the chief eunuch in the middle of the night. She walked the dark alley without fear, only stillness. She knew the game was shifting. Instead of pleading, she recited a poem the Sultan himself had once given her, line by line, her voice low, steady. It spoke of loyalty, of stars that shine brightest in the darkest skies. It was said Abdulaziz, listening from behind a screen, ordered the matter dismissed immediately, and that the other concubine was quietly sent away to a provincial estate. Dilferib remained, silent, watchful, enduring. Elsewhere in the palace's forgotten rooms, another quiet life unfolded. Adil Sultan, daughter of Sultan Mahmud II. Unlike many of her royal sisters, Adil found her deepest identity not in titles or alliances, but in words. She was a poet, one of the few women whose writings were openly celebrated in a literary world dominated by men. In her private quarters, by the soft flicker of oil lamps, she would compose verses on longing, on the rhythms of palace life, on spiritual devotion. But Adil's life, too, carried its shadows. She married Mehmet Ali Pasha, a nobleman of great repute, but their union was not happy. After his sudden death in a political conflict, she withdrew almost entirely from public view. Yet, rather than allow grief to consume her, Adil turned to faith and scholarship. She converted part of her estate into a school for girls, an act radical for its time. And while she never returned to courtly life, she remained a quiet force of compassion and intellect, shaping the minds of a new generation in Istanbul. One former student, writing years later, remembered Adil's soft voice echoing in the stone hallways, reciting a line she repeated often. Knowledge, like the moon, brightens even the darkest courtyard. In the stillness of these stories, Dilferib's poetic resilience, Adil's veiled brilliance, we see the heart of the Ottoman harem not as a theatre of ornament and idleness, but as a deep and breathing world. A world where women shaped empires without armies, shaped futures without ever raising their voices. They spoke in glances, in letters never signed, in perfumes chosen with meaning, in lullabies sung to princes destined to rule. Their legacies were written not always in ink, but in the hush of steps through long corridors, in the turnings of pages in secret journals, in the way they endured. And so the harem was not silent. It was simply tuned to a different frequency, one you hear only when the world outside begins to sleep. Let us gently return to the inner world of the harem, a realm where love whispered behind embroidered veils, rivalry simmered beneath silken smiles, and jealousy was cloaked in jasmine and moonlight. We'll continue without pause, gently weaving one story into the next, as though turning the pages of a forgotten diary left in a velvet drawer. It was during the reign of Sultan Ibrahim I, a time shadowed by his emotional instability and the increasing influence of the women within the harem, that a particularly delicate, volatile triangle formed, remembered in fragments through palace records and private correspondence. At the heart of this triangle was Shivakar Sultan, an ambitious woman of Armenian origin who rose swiftly through the ranks of the harem. She possessed a magnetic charisma that could silence a room without a word. Some called her charming, others dangerous, but all agreed she knew how to wield attention like a dagger in velvet. Her rival was Aishi Sultan, who had been Ibrahim's companion long before Shivakar's arrival. Aishi's beauty was of a subtler nature, quiet, almost melancholic, but it had captured the Sultan's affection early. Her place in the palace had once felt unshakable, secured by her grace and gentle demeanor. But with Shivakar's rise came a subtle shift in the harem's gravity. Banquets began to tilt in Shivakar's favor. Ibrahim's moods became tied to her whims. Her laughter echoed louder in the baths. Her gifts became more extravagant. Silks from Persia, oils from Damascus, poems copied in gold leaf. Aishi, though quiet, was no fool. She knew well that in the harem, affection was a currency, and hers was dwindling. One night, a feast was held in the gilded salon of the Sultan's private quarters. All the favored women were summoned, and the room shimmered with candlelight and soft music played by unseen musicians behind carved screens. The scents of rosewater and clove floated through the air. Shivakar entered in a dress of deep crimson silk, embroidered with tiny silver fish that glinted as she moved. Aishi, always understated, wore lavender, the color of mourning in the empire, though only the older women would have understood the symbolism. The evening was quiet, too quiet, until the Sultan, impulsive and prone to erratic decisions, declared he would gift one of the women a private garden near the harem's baths. The garden was small, but it was sacred, a place of solitude rarely granted. The room turned still. All eyes shifted to Shivakar, who smiled with careful humility. But it was Aishi, softly and without flourish, who stepped forward and knelt before the Sultan, not to beg, but to offer him a poem she had written, a simple one, only 4 lines, a poem about love, fading and returning like the moon in different shapes, but always full in the soul. The Sultan did not speak. He simply looked at her for a long moment. That night, he named Aishi the garden's keeper, but that small victory carried a price. In the following weeks, tensions in the harem thickened. The women divided quietly behind invisible lines, those who aligned with Shivakar and those who still believed in Aishi's quiet dignity. In the silence of the baths, glances were sharper. Footsteps in the halls were quieter. Small accidents occurred, jewelry lost, letters misplaced, favorite robes mysteriously stained. It was then that the chief black eunuch, a towering figure known for his wisdom and discretion, began intercepting anonymous notes, each written with the same delicate hand, each accusing Aishi of consorting with a visiting poet. The Sultan, ever unstable, became suspicious. Aishi was summoned. She spoke little in her defense. Instead, she presented a small hand mirror, an object given to her years ago by the Sultan himself. On its back was carved a single word in Ottoman Turkish, sadakat, loyalty. She placed it before him and left the room. Whether the Sultan was swayed by that gesture, we may never know. What we do know is that days later, Shivakar herself was accused of poisoning a servant girl who had once served Aishi. She was not executed, but quietly removed from favor. She was given a separate wing of the palace, far from the Sultan's rooms. Aishi, though never fully restored to her former standing, remained near the heart of the harem until the end of Ibrahim's reign. Her story, soft as it is, was remembered by those who lived in the alleys long after she had passed, the woman who chose silence over accusation and poetry over vengeance. From Aishi's quiet tragedy, we move gently to another woman, Rukia, a concubine whose name appears only once in official palace records, yet whose story has been preserved through generations of oral tradition among palace attendants. Rukia came not from noble lineage, but from a caravan family in Anatolia. She had a quick wit and a tongue so sharp that the older women in the harem used to say, "She speaks with one hand on her dagger." When she was brought to the palace, she made no effort to charm anyone. She refused perfumes, disdained gossip, and chose instead to read old scrolls, medical texts, mystical Sufi writings. She claimed she had no desire for the Sultan's attention. Of course, this disinterest made her all the more intriguing. The Sultan at the time, young, poetic, and bored with the sycophantic affection around him, found Rukia refreshing. He would send her books, riddles, puzzles. She would respond with corrections, critiques, or silence. Eventually, he summoned her, not to his bed, but to a game of chess. They played for hours. This became their ritual. Every Thursday night, long after the harem fell into sleep, the Sultan and Rukia would meet in a secluded alcove lit by a single lantern and play. No servants, no court gossip, just the pieces on the board, and two minds, both aware that in the palace, strategy was survival. But the other women noticed. Rukia's influence grew, not through favors or displays of beauty, but through quiet intellect. And that, perhaps more than anything else, made her a target. Soon, rumors began that Rukia was using dark arts, that she had ensnared the Sultan's mind with ancient spells. One morning, her rooms were searched, books were taken, a servant girl disappeared. The Sultan, incensed, called for the investigation to cease. But Rukia, ever aware of the tides, chose that night to lose the chess game. It was subtle, just a slip of the bishop, a delay in response. She bowed her head when he won. The next morning, she requested to be moved to the palace library wing, far from the harem. She left behind no letters, no perfumes, no children, only the chessboard. And so, through Aishi's resilience and Rukia's retreat, we see once more that the dark alleys of the harem were never empty. They were full of lives shaped by careful choices of when to speak, when to love, when to let go, and when to simply walk away. Their stories ripple gently through time, not loud but steady, through the shadowed corridors of the Ottoman Harem, where behind every ornate door lies a life of quiet intensity, a hidden history shaped by love unspoken, rivalries simmered behind calm smiles, and sacrifices made in the name of duty or desire. These are not loud histories, but they are enduring, and they live in the folds of silk, in the soft footfalls along marble halls, and in the still air of moonlit courtyards. Let us walk softly into the next tale. In the early 16th century, before Hurrem Sultan's name echoed through the annals of history, another woman held quiet power within the palace walls, Gulbahar Hatun, the concubine of Sultan Mehmed II and the mother of Bayezid II. Gulbahar's life, unlike many dramatic tales of the harem, was marked by subtlety. She was not known for scandal or rebellion. Rather, her power lay in her stillness, an unshakable calm in a world often stirred by ambition. Gulbahar entered the harem when Mehmed was still a prince. She was said to be Circassian, though her origins, like many women of the harem, were erased by the titles she would later carry. What history remembers of her is not how she rose, but how she endured. She bore Mehmed a son, Bayezid, who would later become Sultan. But motherhood in the palace was no safe sanctuary. The Ottoman tradition of fratricide, in which a new sultan had the legal right to execute his brothers to secure the throne, meant that every birth was followed by years of fear. To give life was to risk death. Gulbahar, like all mothers in the imperial harem, lived under the shadow of this silent sword. When Bayezid ascended the throne, she did not return to courtly power as others did. Instead, she moved to Bursa, where she spent her last years in quiet service to religion, commissioning mosques and endowments. No letters remain, no poetry. Just the buildings, still standing, where birds gather and prayers echo. It is said that during Bayezid's reign, he would often pause during meetings, glancing at the horizon as if listening for her voice. In every law he passed protecting his people, her steadiness spoke. Her influence was not through manipulation, but memory. And in the harem, where memories were sometimes the only safe legacy, Gulbahar's became a quiet kind of immortality. As we drift forward in time to the mid-17th century, we come upon a tale steeped in jealousy, a fire that burned too brightly for one woman to contain. Fatma Sultan, daughter of Sultan Ahmed Bey and Kosem Sultan, was not merely royal, she was revered, expected to carry the grace and power of her lineage. Yet, despite her noble birth, her story spiraled into shadows. Fatma was married off, as many Ottoman princesses were, in a political alliance. But unlike many others, she refused to settle into quiet domesticity. She longed for influence and intrigue, craved the thrill of control that her mother, Kosem, had wielded with such mastery. And in the harem, Fatma found a rival not in another princess, but in a concubine, a beautiful young Circassian girl named Dilshad, favored by her brother Sultan Ibrahim. Dilshad had no ambitions for power. She was content in her favored position, her days filled with music, baths, and the occasional poetry reading. But her closeness to the Sultan sparked something dangerous in Fatma. It began with whispers that Dilshad had insulted the memory of their mother, that she dabbled in strange rites, cursed her perfumes with herbs from unknown lands. The palace began to stir with unease. The chief eunuch, long loyal to Fatma, fed these rumors carefully into the Sultan's ears. And yet, nothing seemed to sway him. He continued to visit Dilshad nightly, gave her gifts, laughed in her presence. One night, Fatma entered the Sultan's chambers unannounced. She stood silently at the edge of the room as Dilshad poured wine into a golden cup. When their eyes met, there was no anger, only a deep, profound recognition. Jealousy, Fatma would later write in a letter never sent, is not born from hate. It is born from seeing in another the freedom you were never allowed to have. Shortly after, Dilshad was accused of theft, a rare, unpardonable offense in the harem. Whether the evidence was real or forged, we do not know. But she was removed quietly from the palace, her belongings confiscated, her name struck from the records. Fatma returned to her role, but the palace grew cold around her. The Sultan never forgave her, though he never confronted her either. Her power remained intact, but her joy faded. Some say she would walk alone through the harem gardens at dusk, pausing at the cypress tree where she once saw Dilshad singing softly to herself. Among the quieter tales passed down through eunuchs and scribes is the story of Ainashah and Shahzad, two sisters born of the same concubine during the reign of Sultan Murad III. They were close in age, close in spirit, and inseparable from their earliest days in the harem. They shared tutors, shared robes, even shared a beloved tortoiseshell comb given by their mother, and yet their futures could not have been more different. Ainashah was delicate, with a calm voice and kind eyes. Shahzad was clever, with a laugh that often drew the attention of tutors and servants alike. When Murad III passed and the court shifted, their lives began to diverge. A powerful pasha requested Ainashah's hand, which was granted. Shahzada, left behind, grew resentful, not because she envied the marriage, but because she feared the distance would divide them. Their letters began sweet, full of longing and shared memories. But over time, tension grew. Ainashah, now a powerful wife, wrote of palatial estates and silk shipments. Shahzad wrote of loneliness and political scheming in the harem. Then abruptly, the letters stopped. Years passed, and then, one day, Ainashah returned, widowed, childless, and dressed not in royal silks, but simple cotton robes. She moved back into the harem with quiet grace. The women whispered. Had she been cast aside? Had her husband's fortune turned? None knew for sure. What is known is this. The sisters never spoke again. They passed each other in the halls. They attended the same ceremonies, but not once were they seen together. It was only after their deaths that a single letter was found in Ainashah's writing chest. It read, "Forgive me. I took the life we both dreamed of, and I forgot the part where I was supposed to take you with me." These are the quiet lives, echoes from the long corridors of the harem, lives shaped not always by ambition alone, but by love misunderstood, affection betrayed, and sisterhood cracked by fate. And the harem, despite its gilded gates and marble walls, was in truth a collection of such deeply personal dramas, subtle, yes, but powerful, just like the women who lived them. Now drift gently deeper into the dusky chambers of the Ottoman Harem, where soft whispers outlast royal decrees, and where each tapestry, each faint perfume, trace along a forgotten stairwell, holds echoes of lives shaped by love, rivalry, devotion, and desire. As we continue, I will not break the rhythm. We'll simply ease from one story to the next, letting the silence of centuries guide our path. Safia was brought to the harem during the reign of Sultan Murad III. Venetian by origin, with hair like winter sunlight and eyes the color of fading parchment, she entered not with drama, but with quiet promise. She was not the most beautiful, not the most gifted, but her stillness caught the attention of Murad like no performance ever could. At first, Safiye was merely observed. She did not sing at evening gatherings, nor bathe in the elaborate perfumes other concubines favored. She sat in the garden, reading from a torn Italian prayer book, a remnant from her past. The other women teased her, quietly, as was the custom, but she did not respond. She simply waited. And then one evening, the Sultan passed by the garden after a council meeting. He was weary, his court divided, his mind troubled by distant wars, and he noticed her. Safiye did not rise to greet him. She continued reading. This, perhaps, was what drew him in. That night, she was summoned not to entertain, but to speak. And speak she did, with honesty, without pretense. They talked of ships and stars, of empires and endings. He asked if she missed her homeland. She said only, "What is a homeland but the place where you are listened to?" After that night, Safiye became a quiet fixture in his life. Not his favorite, not the most seen, but always nearby. Their conversations became legend among the palace eunuchs, two minds tethered in a world where so many spoke only in pleasantries and games. Years passed. Other women came and went. Safiye bore him children. Most did not survive infancy. She grew older, gracefully, as others scrambled for his favor. But the Sultan always kept her near. Then, during a long illness, Murad called for her. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of sleep. He whispered, not confessions, but dreams, of the sea, of his youth, of things undone. And she listened. When he died, Safiye did not wail. She simply folded his final words into the pages of her prayer book and returned to her chambers. She wore white for a year. She never remarried. And in the years that followed, she lived in the background of the palace, her presence a ghostly calm. Some say she spoke little after his death. Others say she wrote poems no one ever read. But her attendants remembered one thing clearly. Each evening, she would light a single candle, place the prayer book beside it, and sit in silence until it burned out. She had not waited for power. She had waited for love, and when it ended, she had nothing more to ask of the world. The story of Hatice Sultan, sister of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, is one that sits uneasily between history and legend. She was a woman born into unimaginable privilege, yet bound by the chains of royal obligation. Unlike the concubines, Hatice was imperial by birth. She was raised in luxury, educated with care, and trained in the art of diplomacy. But her life was meant for alliances, not affection. And that made what came next so dangerous. The man was Ibrahim Pasha, a Greek slave who rose through the ranks to become Grand Vizier and Suleiman's closest confidant. Known for his charm, intelligence, and ambition, Ibrahim was welcomed into the highest circles of power. And it was there, amid court ceremonies and private banquets, that Hatice saw him, and he saw her. Their love was not written in letters or secret rendezvous. It was coded into glances, shared metaphors in poetry, pauses between words. They lived in a palace where even breath could betray, so they learned to speak in silences. Eventually, perhaps out of affection for his sister, Perhaps out of political cunning, Suleiman agreed to their marriage. The wedding was lavish, a 7-day celebration of silk and flame, of oaths whispered beneath domes. But not all in the court celebrated, for though Ibrahim was powerful, his enemies were many. Jealous of his influence over the Sultan and his sudden leap into nobility, whispers began that he grew too proud, that he disrespected the Sultan in private, that he had ambitions for the throne. Hatis knew. She had seen the tide shift before. She begged him to be careful, to keep his humility close. But Ibrahim, intoxicated by power and love, dismissed the warnings. Then, one night, without formal accusation or trial, Ibrahim was executed on Suleiman's orders. Hatis awoke to silence. His body was never shown to her. No funeral, no closure, just absence. The palace claimed she returned to court life, that she continued her patronage of the arts, that she moved on. But her attendants told another story, that she kept a mirror in her room, once a wedding gift, and each morning, before speaking to anyone, she would look into it and whisper his name. In time, the silver began to tarnish, but she never replaced it. During the reign of Sultan Ahmed I, the palace was divided, not just between the women who sought his favor, but between two powerful figures whose influence extended far beyond affection. Kosum Sultan, the future Valida Sultan, and Mahfiruz Hatun, the mother of Ahmed's firstborn. Kosum was young, intelligent, and politically astute. Mahfiruz was quieter, more traditional, and fiercely protective of her son, Osman. Both bore sons. Both lived with the knowledge that only one would rise. What made this rivalry so potent was its subtlety. There were no open attacks, no public fights. Instead, there were moments, subtle exclusions at ceremonies, gifts mysteriously lost, servants replaced. The palace seamstresses knew when tension was high. Orders for mourning fabrics would arrive when no one had died. Candles would be sent to wrong chambers. And once, on a spring morning, the royal rose garden, Mahfiruz's favorite retreat, was mysteriously emptied of all its blooms. Only thorns remained. When Ahmed died young, the question of succession loomed large. Osman, the son of Mahfiruz, was the eldest, but Kosum's son, Murad, had the backing of powerful court factions. In the end, Osman ascended. But Mahfiruz's victory was short-lived. Her son's reign was brief and ended in tragedy. He was deposed and later executed. After Osman's death, Mahfiruz disappeared from records. No letters, no tomb inscriptions, only silence. Kosum, by contrast, rose to become one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Yet even she, years later, was said to avoid the rose garden. No one ever replanted the roses. We are still within the walls of the imperial harem, still wrapped in the scent of sandalwood and orange blossom, the hush of footsteps over marble. The lanterns glow faintly now, their flames mirrored in polished brass and sleepy pools of moonlight. And still, the stories whisper. Stories that were once hushed by velvet curtains and silken veils. Let us sit, calmly, and listen. Not all the women of the harem wished for the Sultan's favor. Some longed only for freedom, others for friendship. Afif Hatun was one such figure, born into bondage, brought to the palace before she had learned the shape of her own name. Her origins are blurred, perhaps Greek, perhaps Albanian. It mattered little to the women of the court. Here, within Topkapi, one's worth was measured not in lineage, but in presence. Afif was small, almost forgettable in appearance, but possessed an uncanny sense of knowing when to speak and when to remain utterly still. She served in the bathhouse, helping the Sultan's women prepare for rituals, for celebrations, for seductions they might never desire. She listened more than she spoke, and it was there, in the steam-thick bathhouse chambers, that she met Melike, a girl with laughter that wrapped around her like a second robe. Melike was everything a fief was not: bold, golden-eyed, favored. She had already been summoned by the Sultan twice. The girls grew close, not in public, but in the quiet ways women did in the harem. A brush of fingers as they exchanged linens, a shared apple beneath a fig tree, a secret late-night pact made beneath an open window while the call to prayer echoed faintly through the night air. Melike confessed one night, "I do not love him. I smile because I must. But I dream of leaving, of sailing." A fief said nothing at first, then, very softly, "Then we must plan not for power, but for escape." What they devised was not a grand conspiracy. It was a threadbare dream, a key stolen from a distracted eunuch, a servant's robe left by a careless laundress, a scheduled bath time, the soft distraction of a ceremonial celebration. On the night of their escape, it rained lightly, soft, untroubling. Melike never arrived. A fief waited beneath the terrace near the cypress trees, where a hole in the wall had been widened over months. But no one came. The next morning, word passed through the harem that Melike had fallen ill suddenly. She was said to have passed peacefully, but a fief knew otherwise. There was no illness in her. A fief never tried to escape again. She remained in the palace for years, older now, quieter still. She never served in the bathhouse again. Instead, she worked in the library, copying scripts by oil light. No one knew what had changed her, why she always paused at the western window, Malik's favorite. But sometimes the younger girls would say if you passed her chamber just before dawn, you could hear her whispering. Not prayers, not poetry, but a name and a promise never kept. Razia was a concubine whose beauty was said to stop conversation mid-sentence. She was brought to the harem during the reign of Sultan Selim II, Selim the Sot, as he came to be known, for his love of wine and neglect of politics. Razia's arrival caused an immediate stir. Not only was she young and beautiful, but she sang in a voice that made even the peacocks in the garden fall silent. She was not ambitious, at least not openly. She had no mother at court to guide her, no alliances. But she had charm, the kind that is not learned, the kind that is not safe. Within months, she was summoned often, and within the harem, where each favor from the Sultan carried a ripple of envy, Razia's name became something passed in whispers, first with admiration, then with warning. The women who once laughed beside her now eyed her from behind silk fans. Her robes were found slashed, her mirrors cracked, and once her sherbet was poured into a potted plant, which withered by morning. Still she persisted. She began to move with caution, ate only food prepared by her own servant, slept with the doors bolted, even at the risk of breaking etiquette. But what she could not suspect was the small ivory comb left upon her bed one evening. It was beautiful, carved with tulips, inlaid with gold, far finer than any she owned. She assumed it was a gift from the Sultan. She ran it once through her hair, twice. By the third stroke, she collapsed. The poison was not meant to kill immediately, but slowly, painfully. It was rare, expensive, and completely odorless. She lived 3 more days, unable to speak, only gesture. In her final hours, she scratched a single word into the wood of her chamber door. Why? No one answered. No one was accused. The comb disappeared. But for years after, concubines would avoid any comb not of their own. Even when gifts were offered from the Sultan himself, they would hesitate. And in one of the lesser-known corners of the harem, behind a shelf in the now quiet dormitory, the faint impression of her word remains, scratched so lightly that it can only be seen at night, under candlelight. Why? And indeed, why? The story of Layla is one of beauty, devotion, and a jealousy as cold as a palace fountain in midwinter. She arrived late in the reign of Sultan Ibrahim I, whose erratic rule made the harem an especially precarious place. Layla was not his first love, nor his only, but she was, for a time, his quietest comfort. She had the rare ability to listen, not to flatter, not to intrigue, but truly listen, to his fears, to his griefs, to the burdens of a crown he never truly wanted. Each evening she would wait for him not with perfumes or songs, but with silences, a bowl of sliced figs, a pillow embroidered with verses, a hand held when no one watched. The Sultan began to visit her more and more, and Turhan Hatun, the mother of his favored heir, noticed. Turhan was not unkind, but she was fiercely protective of her son's future, and saw in Layla not a threat of the heart, but of the line. There were rumors Layla might be pregnant, and if her child were a son, the future would change. So Turhan did what the harem had taught many women to do. She waited. She watched. She wove her concerns into casual comments shared with eunuchs and scribes. Not accusations, just questions. One evening, Layla was summoned to the Sultan's chambers, only to be told he would not see her. The next night, the same, and the next. She returned to her chamber each time, sitting alone, staring at the closed window. Then one night, she vanished. The official story claimed she had chosen seclusion, that she had taken vows and left for a distant lodge to live a life of quiet worship. But her chamber remained untouched. Her mirror still bore fingerprints. Her brush still held strands of hair. And in the months that followed, the Sultan was never quite the same. He stopped asking for songs, stopped visiting the gardens. He would pause by the rose window, the one that cast light into Layla's room, and stand there for long minutes. Turhan's son ascended the throne. Her legacy was secured, but no one ever replaced Layla's position, and no concubine was allowed to use her room again. You are lying quietly now, still, as the glow of another chamber's lantern flickers gently in your imagination. With every breath, we slip further into the folds of velvet memory. Memories not your own, but ones that live on in whispers behind brocade walls, behind silence. Let us walk a little farther, gently, without haste. It was not uncommon for mothers of princes, Valid Sultanas, to rule the empire from behind a curtain. But when two women, each powerful and cunning in her own right, occupied the same palace walls, the empire itself seemed to hold its breath. Halime Sultan, mother of Sultan Mustafa I, was a woman shaped by survival. Her son, Mustafa, ascended to the throne not by design, but by default, following the mysterious death of Osman II and the mental instability that plagued him throughout his reign. Halime knew this was her only chance to protect him and herself. She ruled from the shadows, making swift alliances, guiding decisions, and watching, always watching. But Halime's power was not unchallenged. For elsewhere in the palace, a younger, fiercely intelligent woman named Kosem Sultan, widow of Sultan Ahmed I and mother to the future Sultan Murad IV, was waiting. She did not rush. She waited with the patience of one who knew how the palace moved, when to strike and when to become still. When Mustafa's reign faltered due to his mental illness, Kosem moved. With the Janissaries' support, her son was placed on the throne. Halime was removed, but not destroyed. She was sent to the old palace, once a place of retirement for royal women, but now a gilded prison. And it was there that the silent war began. Kosem ruled as regent for her underage son. She was clever, balancing factions, funding charitable works, and ensuring her sons would remain in power. But she knew Halima had not given up. And indeed, in the old palace, Halima sent messages, formed alliances, waited. In time, the struggle claimed more than influence. It claimed lives. Kosem's son, Murad IV, would become a harsh and violent ruler, executing his own brothers. Perhaps Kosem approved. Perhaps she begged him not to. We do not know. But when Murad died young, it was once again Halimi's grandson, Mustafa, who was briefly returned to the throne, only to be deposed again. The two women never met face to face during their final years. They spoke only through servants, through edicts, through unseen hands who carried words like knives between them. Kosem outlived Halime, but not for long. Years later, during the reign of her grandson Mehmed IV, Kosem herself was strangled, betrayed by those she had once protected. And among her last words, it is said, was the name of her old rival. A war fought in whispers. No battlefield, no glory, only shadows. Gulbahar was a concubine of no noble origin. Her name, Spring Rose, was perhaps given by a kind nursemaid in the earliest days of her harem life. She was quiet, quick to learn, and unlike most, utterly obsessed with the stars. The harem was a place of routine, waking, praying, embroidering, rehearsing. But Gulbahar's world was shaped not by the day, but by the night. From her narrow window, she charted the stars with bits of charcoal and pressed rose petals. She read what few astronomy texts were allowed into the women's quarters. And once, during a rare festival when women were allowed to peer beyond the palace gates from a high terrace, she saw a comet, a blazing, icy sword arcing across the sky. She wept at its beauty, and from that night forward, she longed for more. Her chance came in the form of an old court astrologer named Nasruddin, who was brought to consult on the birth of a new royal heir. Gulbahar, still low in rank, was chosen to assist the harem physician with preparing the infant's bath. Nasruddin noticed the celestial drawings on her arms, carefully inked with crushed berries. He asked her about them. She, afraid of punishment, hesitated, then confessed. Rather than scold her, he gifted her a single sheet of his star map, a scrap torn from a larger parchment with the positions of Venus and Mars inked in fine copper. From that day on, he sent her pages, hidden inside bundles of laundry, beneath dried rose petals, inside hollowed books. No one knew. For a time, Gulbahar was free, not of walls, but in her mind. She built a map of the sky in her chamber, used lentils to chart the stars, sang to the phases of the moon. The Sultan, unaware of her secret world, noticed her serenity. He summoned her. They spoke, not of politics, not of seduction, but of stars. She told him that Venus would rise near Jupiter in 6 days. He smiled, and 6 days later, it did. He granted her favor, not the bedchamber, but the right to walk the inner gardens freely. She never bore a child, never became chief consort. But Gulbahar lived to be old, very old, and when she died, the eunuchs found beneath her mattress a stitched quilt of stars, each sewn in colored silk, charting decades of Ottoman sky. She was buried without title, but that quilt, it still remains, not in any museum, not in any hall, but passed quietly between the palace servants for years, a map not of empire, but of wonder. The night, like the harem, deepens with secrets. Its breath is warm now, scented faintly with cardamom and rosewater. Time slows. History stretches out not in dates or scrolls, but in the shape of a woman's hand reaching for power or for love in silence. There is no need to hurry. You are safe here, wrapped in the hush of a story as it unfolds. Among the many courtyards hidden within the harem, there was one rarely mentioned in official records. Small, circular, and rimmed with cinnamon trees brought from Ceylon centuries earlier, it was called the Tarchan Avlusu, the cinnamon courtyard. It was said that any woman granted the privilege to walk its red-hued gravel had gained the private favor of the Sultan. But with favor came attention, and with attention came danger. Dilruba, whose name meant heart stealer, came from Bosnia. Not noble, not schooled in politics, but her laughter, they said, was like a soft bell rung in a hall of mirrors. When she arrived in the harem, she was unremarkable. She scrubbed floors, served food, sang to the younger girls. But Dilruba had an intuition, a way of reading people that could not be taught. She began to win friends carefully, quietly. Her small kindnesses went unnoticed by the guards, but not by the women. She stitched other girls' torn robes. She helped a eunuch hide a broken vase. She never asked for reward, and so she was trusted. One day, while carrying linens past the Sultan's private garden, she began humming a folk song, one her mother had sung while baking flatbread. She did not know the Sultan was nearby, but he heard her and smiled. 2 days later, she was summoned. She expected fear, awkwardness. Instead, the Sultan asked her where she had learned that song. She told him. He asked about her homeland, her family, what she dreamed of. "I dream of never being forgotten," she said quietly. He summoned her again, then again, and soon the cinnamon courtyard welcomed her. She was clothed in better silks, given a new chamber. The other concubines began to whisper. Some warned her, others flattered her. But none trusted her anymore. One night, after sharing a sherbet with the Sultan and reciting a poem she had composed, he kissed her forehead and said, "Dilruba, one day they will speak your name in the same breath as Hurrem." That was the beginning of the end. Within weeks, subtle plots formed. Someone accused her of disrespecting the Valid Sultan. Someone claimed she practiced folk magic from the Balkans. Then came the accusation that she had poisoned another concubine, though no evidence was found. The Sultan grew distant, distracted by affairs of state. The cinnamon courtyard's gate was closed to her. Then, one morning, her chamber was found empty. She was not executed, nor banished. She simply vanished. Some say she was sent to a remote lodge under a false name. Others that she returned to her homeland, aged and forgotten. But a letter was discovered decades later in the lining of a storage chest, unsigned, unsent, written in Bosnian. A passage stood out. "I rose with kindness. I fell by beauty. But it was envy that buried me." To this day, the cinnamon courtyard remains empty, overgrown, the cinnamon trees fruitless, and the gravel, once a warm red, has faded, like memory. There was another woman named Mihri, and she was unlike any other woman brought into the harem. Born in Georgia, taken at 16, she had already lived through raids, betrayals, and the loss of her family. She arrived with no illusions. She knew what was expected of her. But Mihri did not break. She did not cry when her name was changed. She did not tremble when stripped of her clothes, her language, her freedom. She stood silent. Her beauty was undeniable. High cheekbones, hair like coiled night, eyes the color of storm glass. When presented before the palace selector, she was passed over with a note. Dangerous fire. Keep from flint. And so, Miri was assigned menial tasks, collecting herbs from the palace gardens, drying fruit, helping with perfumes. She never sought attention, but attention found her. One evening, she brewed a unique blend of oils, anise, clove, amber, for the Valid Sultan's baths. The scent was so singular, so haunting, that even the Sultan inquired who had made it. She was summoned. He asked her about the oil. She answered. When he complimented her scent, she said flatly, "It was not meant for you." It was a dangerous thing to say, a foolish one. But the Sultan laughed and summoned her again. What followed was not a romance, but a strange courtship of silence. He asked. She answered plainly. He complimented. She corrected. He offered her jewelry. She declined. He called her the Thorned Rose. She never slept with him. Not once. Whispers flew. Was she cursed? A sorceress? Was she using spells? But those who served her said no. She simply never wanted power. And when asked why she refused the Sultan, she said, "My will is the only thing I have not lost. I will not give it." She remained in the harem, untouched, for 7 years. In time, she asked for one favor, to become a bath attendant for the elder concubines. She lived out her days boiling water, preparing salts, massaging the tired limbs of women forgotten by time. And when she died, the room filled with the scent of anise. The Sultan, now old, is said to have wept. She had never been his. And that, perhaps, was why he remembered her the longest. The hour grows deeper still. The moon outside the imagined lattice of your mind hangs heavy, wrapped in silver gauze, and you, still and safe, are invited to wander deeper through the corridors of a palace that no longer stands as it did, yet still lingers in memory. You are not alone. You are with them. Those women of silk and iron, of rivalry and roses, whose voices were seldom recorded, but whose lives rippled through centuries, like the hem of a sultan's robe brushing polished stone. Let us step softly now into another story. In the later days of Sultan Murad III's reign, there came to the harem a young Venetian girl named Sophia Baffo, though her name was soon softened to Safiye, the Pure One. She was delicate in appearance, but no flower. Rather, she was steel encased in alabaster. Her hair was golden ash, her eyes a pale sea grey. But it was her voice that made women in the harem pause mid-step, and eunuchs linger longer at doors than duty allowed. Safiye could sing, not in the trained way of court musicians, but with something older, something ancestral. Her voice, low and clear, was said to coax tears from even the most hardened guards. And when she sang in the Sultan's presence for the first time, even his scribes looked up from their ledgers. Soon she was called not just to entertain, but to remain. The Sultan's affection grew quickly. Too quickly. Safiya was elevated before older, more politically connected concubines had their turn, and the harem seethed. There was Dilhayat, the daughter of a Circassian nobleman, trained in poetry and debate, who had waited years for her moment. and Nurbanu, who claimed distant lineage from Persian royalty and who believed herself destined to be Valide Sultan. Now, both were eclipsed by a girl who sang lullabies in a forgotten dialect. Safiye did not seek power, but power fell at her feet. Her son, Mehmed, was born a year later, strong, bright-eyed, favored. The Sultan grew possessive, so did the other women. One evening, Safiye's private chamber was ransacked. Her musical instruments shattered, her sheet music torn into strips and burned. She said nothing. She simply stopped singing. But her silence was more powerful than any song. The Sultan grew restless, cold. He summoned concubines but dismissed them quickly. The balance in the harem shifted. Jealousy turned inward. Accusations flew. One concubine was exiled, another vanished. And then Safiye sang again, not for the court, not for the Sultan, but alone, one night, beneath the lattice of her garden window. The song drifted like smoke through the harem. The words were unfamiliar, but the sorrow in them pierced every wall. She never ascended to Valide Sultan, but when her son, Mehmed III, came to power, he ensured her a golden chamber of her own where she could sing, unbothered, until the end of her days. They say the song she sang that night had no lyrics, only longing. In the heart of the harem there hung a mirror that bore silent witness to 1,000 betrayals. It was not large, oval in shape, framed in a lattice of mother-of-pearl and bronze. Positioned between two marble columns near the Sultan's bath, it reflected the comings and goings of women, whispers, glances, and things unsaid. But two women, Aishi and Shah, once used it not for vanity, but for war. Aishi was a former laundry maid, chosen by the Sultan during a spring festival for her wit. Shah Sultan was his cousin, brought to the palace not for pleasure, but for political marriage. Yet she remained, claiming ancestral ties and asserting her right to oversee the upbringing of future heirs. They could not have been more different. Aishi spoke plainly. Shah quoted Persian verse. Aishi embroidered with common threads. Shah used gold leaf. Aishi laughed easily. Shah, not at all. But the Sultan favored them both. Not in the same way, but with equal intensity. He sought Aishi when weary, craving laughter and bread with honey. He consulted Shah when troubled by dreams, seeking counsel and elegance. And so began their mirror war. Each morning they would visit the mirror separately. Aishi would smear a drop of jasmine oil on the glass so it would glisten when Shah arrived. Shah would respond by placing a single ivory pin in the frame's edge, a symbol of silent authority. The other concubines watched in nervous awe. Eunuchs were sent between them bearing cryptic messages, a folded fan, a peeled fig, a note with no writing at all. It was said that each time the Sultan passed the mirror, he would smile, knowing. One morning, both women arrived at the same time. Neither expected the other. They stood on either side of the mirror, reflections meeting. One woman in a soft pink robe, the other in rich emerald. Aishi spoke first. "Shall we settle it?" Shah tilted her head. "Without words?" Aishi nodded, and the two began to dance. No music, no audience. Just movement, echoing, mirrored, graceful. A duel in gesture. Bow, turn, pause. The mirror caught every turn of the wrist, every flicker of challenge. And when it ended, they bowed to each other and parted. From that day, they never warred again. The Sultan never knew. Or perhaps he did. Perhaps it was why he chose to keep the mirror there until his death. And when the palace later fell into disuse, the mirror was removed, cracked slightly at one edge. It now rests in a private collection. Still framed in pearl, still silent. But if you look closely enough, you might see two women dancing, deeper into the hush of memory. The scent of sandalwood lingers now, faint, calming, like the final note of a melody long faded. The night does not ask questions. It only invites you to listen, to feel, to slip silently behind the veils of time where the women of the Ottoman Harem once breathed, dreamed, and battled. Here, the darkness is not cruel, it is velvet. It softens every whispered betrayal, every longing glance. Let us return, quietly, and hear another tale. In the reign of Sultan Ahmed I, when the harem had swelled with new concubines from across the empire, there arose two women whose feud would etch itself into whispers for decades. They were not born rivals, but neither was the moon meant to compete with fire. Fatma, daughter of a Turkish scholar, was brought to the harem at 13. Reserved, patient, and observant. She spoke little, smiled rarely, and moved like wind over water, without sound, yet with certainty. Her beauty was of the gentle kind, dusk-colored eyes, a soft mouth, skin the shade of aged ivory. Then came Gulnaz, the flame. Persian-born, daughter of a jewel merchant, she wore her ambition as boldly as her crimson robes. She laughed loudly, moved swiftly, and never entered a room without owning it. Her hair was the color of pomegranate seeds, her voice bold, her jewelry chosen to blind. They could not have been more different. Yet the Sultan noticed both. First, Fatma, quietly, unexpectedly. One evening she recited a verse from Rumi in the Sultan's presence. He turned his head, asked her to repeat it. She did, slowly, with reverence, and something in his eyes shifted. A week later, he summoned her again. Soon after, he summoned Gulnaz. She had not read Rumi, but she wore a ruby at her throat and knew how to catch light with her laughter. To the outside world, they were just two concubines among many, but inside the palace, they became magnets, drawing eyes, alliances, and whispers. They never argued, never raised voices. Their war was waged in gestures. When Fatma embroidered a gift for the Sultan, Gulnaz composed a poem and had it sung by a court musician. When Gulnaz sent the Sultan a tray of sweets she had helped prepare, Fatma replied with a tiny book of hand-copied scripture. It was not love they fought for, it was position, security, influence. In the harem, love was a fleeting luxury. The women split into factions, those who admired Fatma's grace and those who craved Gulnaz's fire. Even eunuchs chose sides quietly. And then, one day, the Sultan fell ill. For 3 weeks he remained in his chamber, visited only by his mother and select physicians. Fatma and Gulnaz were barred from entry. They waited, hearts tight, eyes hollow. When he emerged, thinner but smiling, he summoned no one. He simply walked through the gardens and stopped by the fountain where the women often gathered. And there, without a word, he handed 2 items to the head eunuch, a ruby ring and a poem. Both women received one. Neither knew which had come from him directly, neither dared ask. But from that day forward, Fatma and Gulnaz sat beside each other in the baths, not as friends, not as enemies, but as 2 women who understood the weight of attention and how fickle its favor could be. There is a story rarely told outside the inner circles of palace lore, of Yasemin, the concubine who was not betrayed by a rival, but by her most trusted servant. Yasemin was born in Thessaloniki, spirited away at 15, trained not just in dance, but in diplomacy. Unlike most, she had a gift for secrets. She knew when to speak, when to listen, and most of all, how to remember. She rose quickly in favor with Sultan Mahmud I, not because of beauty alone, but because she was one of the few who understood the balance between flattery and honesty. She spoke to him as if he were a man first, not a monarch. She had no enemies in the harem, at least not openly. Her demeanor was measured, her voice soft, her steps careful. She kept no allies either, save for Layla, her handmaid. Layla had come with her from the outer palace. The two had shared everything. Yasemin trusted her with every note, every gift, every glance exchanged with the Sultan. But Layla, though loyal, had grown bitter. She too had been beautiful once. She too had dreamed of being chosen. Instead, she had been relegated to a life of fetching combs and mixing perfumes. The breaking point came not with malice, but in a moment of heartbreak. One evening, Yasemin asked Layla to deliver a letter to the Sultan, a private note confessing her wish to become his Hazodalik, his favored companion. Layla never delivered the letter. Instead, she copied it, and gave the copy to another concubine, one who hated Yasemin in silence. The scandal it caused was quiet, but lethal. Rumors spread that Yasemin had overstepped, had dared to request status before it was offered, that she had insulted the Valid Sultan by assuming favor. 3 days later, Yasemin was relocated, not killed, not imprisoned, but sent to the old palace, where retired concubines and widowed courtwomen spent their years in dusty quietude. Her chamber was small, her mirror unpolished, her meals bland, but Yasemin never asked why. She knew. She never saw Layla again. But in the final years of her life, an old eunuch recalled seeing her sit beside a window, gazing at the skyline, whispering something over and over. Even a letter has a heartbeat. The air in these deeper chambers grows stiller, older. There is a hush here, not of fear, but of reverence. Time slows its breath. You are now wandering where only shadows remember the truth, where names once carried in whispers still echo faintly beneath layers of silken silence. You walk the dark alleys of the harem's memory now, and every soft step reveals another story, unfolding like a rose pressed inside the pages of history. In the later years of Sultan Ibrahim's troubled reign, the harem had grown increasingly divided, not only by personal ambition, but by bloodlines. Two women, both mothers of the Sultan's sons, eyed each other not with hatred, but with the slow, simmering patience of those who knew time itself would decide the victor. Humasha was of Bosnian origin, chosen by the Sultan in one of his more lucid months. Pale-skinned, calculating, she played the long game, always remaining 2 steps behind or 2 ahead, but never beside. She had given birth to Prince Osman, a boy said to be gentle, intelligent, and prone to long silences. Then there was Shekapare, famously curvaceous and quick-tempered, with a laugh that could turn heads even in the presence of royalty. Her son, Prince Mehmed, was charming, fiery, beloved by the Janissaries for his boldness. The palace's internal balance trembled. Not since the days of Kosem had the women of the harem feared so much for their sons' futures. Sultan Ibrahim, increasingly unstable, left decisions to whispers and dreams. His sons were growing, playing beside one another under the eyes of guards, unaware of what their existence meant for the other. And so the two mothers circled one another. At dinners, Humasha offered pastries laced with saffron. Shekapare countered with cherries from Bursa, gifts wrapped in lace. When Humasha gifted the Valide Sultan a cushion stitched with lilies, Shekapare sent a shawl of silk dyed in 7 shades of blue. But beneath the courtesies, tension cracked like frost. Then came the lemon garden incident. One morning, the young princes were found in the lemon courtyard, unattended, building towers of small stones. Nothing unusual, except that both boys were wearing the same embroidered vest, a rare gift that was meant to signify the heir. It had been stitched only once, and both claimed it was given to them by their mothers. Chaos followed. The Valide Sultan demanded explanation. The palace dressmakers were interrogated. Eunuchs were punished, but the truth was never discovered. Some said both women had secretly commissioned copies of the vest in advance, anticipating the Sultan's favor. Others whispered that one of them had bribed the other's tailor. Whatever the case, the result was surprising. Rather than punishment, the Valide Sultan called both women to a private meeting in the lemon garden. There, away from the watchful ears of the court, a pact was made. It is said that they agreed: no poison, no arranged accidents, no manipulation through the boys. Whoever's son became sultan, the other would protect. The pact was never recorded, but years later, when Mehmed ascended and Osman was sent peacefully into retirement rather than death, the eunuch said, "A mother kept her promise." And in the lemon garden, 2 empty stone towers were left untouched. The harem housed not only concubines and queens, but also servants, dancers, musicians, and maids of all kinds. Among them was a girl who never spoke. She was simply called Zarafet, Grace. No one knew where she came from. She had no papers, no family ties. She arrived with a shipment of silk, quiet as dusk, and was first noticed not for her silence, but for her memory. Zarafet could remember anything. She served tea once to the Sultan's astrologer, and 2 days later repeated, word for word, the planetary alignment he had discussed in a hushed tone. She arranged flowers not randomly, but in the same order favored by a long-dead Valide Sultan, based on a tapestry she had seen only once. Soon she was assigned to the Sultan's private garden, where only trusted hands were allowed. There she met Dervish, the Sultan's personal calligrapher. He was old, nearly blind, but spoke to her as if she could answer. One afternoon, as he sketched the name of Allah in gold ink, a peacock feather fell from his writing brush. Zarafet picked it up, and in the sand nearby, carefully drew the same word he had written, mirrored. Dervish stared at it for a long time. The next day he returned with a scroll of paper, ink, and a new feather brush. He handed it to her, and from that day forward they wrote to each other in silence. Their friendship was hidden from the others, not forbidden, but too strange to explain. He began teaching her not just letters, but secrets, the language of divination, of dreams, of veils within veils. But palace eyes are never fully shut. One day the scrolls disappeared. Dervish was summoned for questioning. Zarafet, unable to defend herself, was reassigned to the laundry wing. They never saw each other again. But years later, a book appeared in the palace library, written in an unfamiliar hand, unsigned. The calligraphy danced across the page in mirrored script. Its title, The Feather Speaks. No one could read it, but no one dared throw it away. They say it still sits on the shelf, untouched, unread, quietly humming. Let's continue walking softly through these hushed and echoing chambers. You are now well within the heart of the harem's memory. The air is thick, not with incense alone, but with stories, braided like hair, delicate and dark. tales not preserved in books, but passed ear to ear, where lips brushed close and voices never dared to rise above the rustle of silks. This was a place where a smile could be a weapon, a glance could promise ruin and longing. Oh, longing was worn like perfume, unseen but heavy. Let me tell you another. Long before the harem swelled with foreign-born concubines, there lived a woman named Safiye, not the famed queen mother, but a namesake born a generation later in the same Albanian hills. Her eyes were like lake water, clear and cold, and her smile carried a sadness no one could explain. Safiye was not one to seek attention. She did not perform. She did not flirt. Instead, she walked like a shadow, appeared where she was not expected, and listened more than she spoke. She had been in the harem for 5 years before the Sultan noticed her, or rather, remembered her. He had passed her once as a boy. She was carrying a basket of dates. He had taken one. She had not bowed. He remembered. And when he summoned her at last, it was not for beauty or charm. It was to ask, quietly, "Why did you not bow to me that day?" Safiye, kneeling, answered, "Because you were still a boy, and boys should not be bowed to." The Sultan laughed, genuinely, deeply, and then, curiously, he asked her to stay 3 nights with him. Not 1, not 2, 3. Such a request was unheard of. To repeat a companion without interval was to invite scandal, jealousy, disruption. But she did. She stayed. And each night, they did not touch. Instead, they talked. She told him of the hills where she had been born, of the herbs her grandmother grew, of the day the soldiers took her, and the way her mother had cried without a sound. He asked her, "Do you hate me for being Sultan?" She replied, "No, but I might have loved you if you weren't." On the 4th day, Safiye disappeared. She was not dead, nor banished. She was quietly transferred to the Palace of Tears, Topkapper's quiet sister, where some concubines were sent when their presence was deemed too distracting. It was a silent exile, but in his later years, the Sultan was said to have kept a small satchel on his desk. Inside it, dried herbs from the Albanian hills. He never explained why. Power in the harem was not always subtle. There were times it erupted. Quietly, yes, but unmistakably. One such moment occurred during the reign of Sultan Selim III, known for his love of art, music, and women. Within his harem lived Halime, a former dancer from the coastal town of Izmir. Light on her feet, lithe in movement, she had been gifted with rhythm that made even musicians pause mid-beat. She quickly became a favorite, not just of the Sultan, but of nearly everyone in the harem. Her presence was infectious, gentle, funny, effortlessly warm, and that became a problem. Another consort, Dilruba, had been the favored woman for nearly 3 years. Elegant, stern, and from noble Circassian lineage, she had ruled the inner chambers like a queen without crown. Halime did not challenge her, but her laughter did. One night, the Sultan requested Halime to dance in the Jasmine Room, a private chamber scented heavily with white blossoms. It was known to be the space where he made his most personal decisions. A room where power whispered through petals. Halime danced, and the next day the Sultan ordered new garments to be made for her, a sign of rising favor. Dilruba noticed. 2 days later, Halime's shoes were found torn to ribbons. A week later, her music sheets vanished. Then, a small fire in her room. Each event minor in isolation, but together unmistakable. The eunuchs intervened. The Valide Sultan summoned both women. The Jasmine Room was closed for 10 days. When it reopened, Halimi never danced again, but she remained in the harem, quietly, respectfully. And each time the jasmine bloomed in the courtyard, she walked beneath it, barefoot, humming a tune only she remembered. Years later, when Dilruba died, her will contained a strange request: to have jasmine flowers placed on my chest and none near my head. Some say it was guilt, others say it was fear. Not all tales of the harem were of rivalry. Some were of romance, too quiet to be noticed, too restrained to bloom. Rayhan was a reader. Assigned to the library wing of the palace, her role was simple: maintain scrolls, dust shelves, and occasionally read aloud to the Valide Sultan when her eyes ached. She had no ambitions, only questions. It was during one of these readings that she met Prince Murad, the Sultan's younger brother, confined to the palace under the tradition of cafes, the cage. He was not a prisoner, not exactly, but he could not leave, could not marry, could not live fully. They met in the quietest corner of the library. Rayhan was reading a poem by Fuzuli aloud. He said nothing, just listened, eyes on the window. But the next day the poem was missing from its place, and in its spot was a single peacock feather and a note: "You read like a whisper." They never touched, never sat closer than 5 paces. But over the months they began leaving things for one another: a pressed flower, a line of verse, a drawing of a tree they could both see from different windows. It could not last. When the Sultan died unexpectedly, Prince Murad became Sultan. He summoned Rayhan only once, not to claim her, but to say goodbye. "I must marry for the empire," he told her, "but I will always write for you." And he did. A collection of his poems, written under a pen name, were later found, bound in blue silk. The first line read, "She never looked at me, but I saw her always. Jealousy, like perfume, spreads easily in the harem, sometimes invisible, sometimes sweet, but always potent." In the reign of Sultan Mahmud the First, there lived 2 sisters, not by blood, but by bond. Fatma and Shenet, both from Circassian lands, were taken into the palace together, trained together, and for a long while loved each other more fiercely than they dreamed of loving any man. Fatma was serious, soft-spoken, and wise. Senet was fire, laughter, and ambition. They shared a room, shared secrets, shared a dream: to survive, and perhaps rise. But only one would catch the Sultan's eye, and it was Senet. She was made his favored concubine after just a few meetings. Gifts began to pour in: emerald rings, silk gowns, gold hairpins. She promised Fatma nothing would change, but everything did. Fatma was left behind, watching the sister vanish into power. Still, she said nothing. She smiled, she served tea. She braided Senet's hair before her nightly visits to the Sultan. And one night, she placed a comb on the pillow, a delicate ivory comb painted with mother of pearl, a gift. Senet used it, and by morning her scalp had blistered, her face was swollen, her hair falling. The palace physicians came. The Valide Sultan called for silence. Whispers swirled. The poison was slow, not lethal, but disfiguring. Senet never returned to the Sultan's side. She remained in the harem, veiled, silent, half-shadow. Fatma was never questioned. No one could prove the gift had been hers. But years later, when she was old and unchosen, she told a younger girl, "Never serve tea you haven't tasted yourself, and never share a dream with someone hungrier than you." And now, we step gently back from the silken veils, the flicker of oil lamps, and the delicate whispers hidden in the folds of time. The harem falls silent once more. Its jealous glances, its stolen laughter, its long and lonely sighs, slipping back into shadows. We leave the soft-footed girls behind their latticed windows, the perfume still lingering, their secrets resting quietly as they have for centuries, beneath domes of gold and dreams of what could have been. Perhaps their stories followed you into a hush, a warmth behind the eyes, a breath slowing. Not everything needs to be remembered right away. Some stories, like sleep, arrive slowly, silently. Let them stay with you a while longer, soft and weightless, as night gathers gently around your thoughts. You are safe now. The palace doors are closed, the echoes quiet, and the dreams just beginning. Good night, dear listeners, and thank you for wandering with me.